Siyabonga Bishop, siyabonga mfundisi. Njengoba asikhumbutile umbishop ukuthi namuhla June 16, it means a lot for us. And it is important ukuthi we contextualize why we're here today. Ngiyafika nje ngibuya la eSeligen emaRomeni. We had gone to celebrate June 16 and to also impart education and our experiences to the students, something that we do every year. And it was important for us ukuthi sihlanganise lento nemagogoism. Sitawukhumbula ukuthi for the past 14 years we've been having Magogoism and the Number 43 legacy event here, Kamagogo, and here, Eswatini. But this year, we decided with a very sore heart to shift the event to South Africa. And this is because of reasons beyond our control. We could no longer continue to convince our partners and our guests that they can have a normal celebration of the freedom of South Africa from the kingdom. We then decided for this year, until further notice, we're going to have the event in South Africa. But like we did during the lockdown, we did not have the legacy event, but we kept Magogoism. Ibandla leMalutela, under the leadership of Bishop, continued to support the needs of people in Eswatini. In the 2 years where we could not hold the event in the kingdom, we actually extended the number of beneficiaries from 43 to 100 beneficiaries. That came from the fact that COVID had an impact not only to people who were abled, but it had even a bigger impact to those who were less abled. And this is why we had to extend. Now this year, Bishop said, much as you've made the decision to change the geography, now we make decisions every year as employees, as policymakers, as business people, rightly or wrongly. And these decisions that we make may have negative impact on a community that you are not even aware of. Wasutsum Bishopi, Masilela, even if you are changing the geography, you may have a very good reason for doing it. The needs of the people, the needs of the Swazis cannot change geography. They'll remain in Swaziland. And because for us, it's a Kayala, and we have relatives in Swaziland, as Sithelila, we are relatives. We could not ignore that. Sasa siyavumelana ke ne-bishop in Elbandla ukuthi we will continue to do it. But the change in the geography has had another impact on it. It also meant we have to do Magogoism at the community that is going to host us this year. This year we're going to a place called Paris. They'll think you're saying Paris. But it is the Paris of South Africa. And sisihlanganene elibandla lapha mfundisi lama Methodist emaWeseli bewala a few years back to come and share with us. They've offered to host us. What I didn't check with Bishop that I probably need to check now is whether libandla leMalutela likhona in Paris.
I should think so. I'm not sure.
Let's check. If likhona, I think it's So next weekend, we're having the legacy event in Paris, in South Africa. And we have then committed that we will do exactly what we're doing here, which we call Magogoism, back in Paris. And this for us is very instrumental because we've just concluded that the world over were needy. And when we think of Magogoism, Magogoism is the spirit of giving and sharing selflessly. That says whatever you have, share with the person next to you. It doesn't matter what it is. And part of the exercise that we're doing at Salesian today, we're imparting our knowledge to the school. What we also did was to formally communicate for the second time to the nation of Eswatini of how this year is important to the Salesians and how it is important to the kingdom. This year, 2023, we are celebrating 70 years of the Salesians having landed on the kingdom. If you think about it, what have the Salesians brought with them? I always say one of the things they brought with them is civilization. The first multi-story building to be constructed in Swaziland was constructed here. When the Salesians arrived in Swaziland, they arrived with one sole purpose: to educate and groom the young Swazi boy. Today, Eswatini can be very proud of having, I think, 3 prime ministers, at least 3 prime ministers to have been generated by Salesian. It has generated at least 1 bishop, many priests, many business people, many politicians. One of the business people that I always talk about that originates from Salesian is one of the founders of Netflix. Do you all know Netflix? So one of the founders, his hands come from Salesian. So in 2018, you'll remember we published a book as a family called Larry Simply Larry. And this book is a book that tells the story of Father Larry McDonnell, but more broadly, the relationship of the Salesians with the Kingdom of Swaziland. We then went a step further and produced an audiobook of Larry Simply Larry. We kept the audiobook under wraps until this year. We have unveiled that book as part of the celebration of 70 years. And this to us is a very important contribution to what we should know as our history and what we should embrace as our legacy as a people. Now, before I hand over to Mfundisi to take us through the program for today, as part of sharing education, imparting our history and knowledge, we have also made another determination. One of the biggest weaknesses of the black people, Bantu labamnyama, is that we don't have a culture of writing and documenting things. So over time, our history, our knowledge, our superiority before our colonial masters came here has been lost. What we are trying to do as one of the things that Number 43 is doing is to try and change that. Why we emphasize on writing books, why we emphasize documenting, why we emphasize capturing the events that we have, small as they are going to have an impact in the academic future of all our countries. When people go and research what happened during COVID Eswatini, what happened during COVID in South Africa, there already is a book that we have published that tells us that. And this is extremely important for us. So we're working with libraries, we're working with universities, we're working with schools. where they can actually keep this documentations that we're generating as a foundation. Today, we've decided to share some of the books that we have written and published as Number 43 to Eswatini National, Eswatini Swazi National Trust. Mina ngayigcina is saying something else. The So we are going to use this opportunity to hand over these books to the representatives of ENST. May you request them to come through. I will give them over by order. The first one is the original book, year number 43, which tells the story Samakoko. When we keep talking about Makoko and Magogoism, the theory comes from here. And we're trying to convert it into practice in this gathering. We are hoping that you'll preserve this history for us. Then the next book that we're going to give out is a book that we produced for purposes of the youth. We all know that the youth is lazy at reading. When we gave them this book, they never even looked at it. But when we gave them this book, which tells the same story in pictures, they started engaging with the history. But more importantly, is a lesson, a very rude lesson that I went through trying to know my family. At some point on my father's side of the family, Beksele Umkulu and the elder sister, who was actually instrumental in producing this book. When we published this book, I went to Mamelodi to hand over a copy of this book to her. She paged through it. With disinterest, she put it aside. And she said words that are still cutting through my heart today. She says to me, "Kodwa Elias ungenzani? Why unginika incwadi yesilungu? Awazi ukuthi angikwazi ukufunda isilungu." That hurt me to the core. But a few years later, when I gave her this book, I had to wait for her to go through page by page until she got to the end. And when she finished, she said to me, "Uyabona ke, nayi incwadi engayifunda." And I'm hoping that this book is going to bridge a gap between the youth that are lazy to read and the unfortunate Swazis that have never had the opportunity to go to school. And they'll use this book to engage with their history and their past. Thank you very much. The next book I'm going to give is this one. This is the Larry Simply Larry, which was published in 2018. And what is very interesting is that when this book was published, Larry was still alive. And it was launched at Salesian on his birthday. We didn't know. It was coincidental. After receiving this book, he giggled like a primary school boy. 3 months later, Larry died of starvation. We are told by the priests that remain that he concluded that he has done all that he could do in this world and was content with himself and did not have any reason to live. And he just chose not to eat until he died on Christmas Day 2018. Even more interesting is that on Christmas Eve, before he died, he didn't know he was going to die. Christmas Eve, before he died, he called the nurses in the clinic or hospital where he was. And he said, come here, I want to bless you. And these nurses turned around and says, "Ha unan lumkhulu lo." He's the one who needs the blessing, not us. But they came around anyway. He blessed all of them. He prayed, and then they went back to work. This was just before midnight. The following morning, he was recorded dead. Now, can you imagine getting a blessing from somebody like that at that stage? Bishop, I'm going to conflict you. Isn't that the best blessing? Bishop, he doesn't have to answer. But this is part of the history of the kingdom's civilization and acceptance of the Bible as a very important document for the Swazi nation. Siyabonga. Set your sins. The last book I'm going to share with you is a book that we wrote and published during the lockdown. It took us exactly 1 month to publish this book. And incidentally, as we're in the process of doing this, the United Nations learned about the project that the Masilelas were doing. And they approached us and they said, we've heard that you're doing something like this, but we know that there's nobody anywhere else in the world that is doing something like this. Can we partner with you to publish this book? And we couldn't say no. This is why the book has the UN emblem at the bottom. And if you can imagine how difficult it is to get that emblem, to approve or endorse what you're doing, that tells you how important this book is. So this is going to be one of the documents that are going to be used as a basis for research 100 years later, when a similar scourge hits the world. They are going to learn from us how we actually survived the COVID of 2020 and 2021. This is going to be a lesson for all families in the kingdom. Siyabonga. You want to say something?